first thing we'd like to know as an architect of G20, you not only used it as an event, but also in India's strategic economic development. Would you like to share with us on what behind it, went behind it, and how did we leverage that particular event?
Well, thank you, Anand, and it's great to be here in this Tourism Leadership Summit organized by the USISPF and the Sankla Foundation. G20 was quite a unique presidency in many ways because for India it was an opportunity to take the global center stage, but it was also an opportunity for us to be able to take G20 right down to the grassroots levels. And I think Prime Minister's vision was very clear that this presidency of ours should not be one that is in Delhi. Not in Delhi alone, because for the rest of the country, it's some remote international conference in Delhi. He felt it should go down to every state and union territory in India because we had to host some 200 meetings. So the idea was to, as the PM says, to convert an event into a mass movement. And so there was a Jan Bhagidari mode in which it was taken across the country. And I think you'll all agree with me that the G20 logo and G20 was known across the board. Every auto rickshaw driver knew it, every vendor knew it. And you had companies, like Coca-Cola, you had companies, the big companies wanted to use the G20 logo. And I remember one foreign correspondent asking me, he said, how much are you paying these companies to use the logo? I said, it's the other way around. Companies are paying us to be allowed to use this logo. So it was that successful in terms of promotion. But in tourism terms, I think what happened was that we took it to places that had never done international conferences. We took it to Mizoram, we took it to Kutch, we took it to, obviously, to Kerala and Kanyakumari, but we took it to Srinagar. Srinagar, I can tell you, was a game changer because when G20 came in and you had 300 or 400 international delegates coming to Srinagar, a city where, or a state where most embassies had travel restrictions for its people. And you had people from these countries coming in large numbers. You had UN personnel coming in. I think people really took note. And of course, you also had the beautification of Srinagar. It became a smart city. So with G20, we had this entire Jhelum River upgradation. We had markets that were smart markets, everything underground, sewerage, power lines, all that clutter was underground. It was absolute pedestrian, car-free pedestrian market. So it was incredible. And so in many senses, whether we took them to Srinagar to see, those wonderful, visuals that we got there, or you took them to my hometown, which is Darjeeling, Siliguri, or you took them right to, Kochi and, places which were off the beaten track in the normal course. I think it was quite an incredible way to take international delegates, many of whom were involved with the tourism industry, down to the grassroots level. I know that the meeting we did in Darjeeling was the G20 tourism meeting. And you had these G20 people who dealt with tourism, your travel agents come down all the way. And that exposure to them was great. But what is the impact on the ground? Let me just share that with you also. Because in Darjeeling, because of G20, we got the place completely, I would say, spruced up. The mall was absolutely cleaned up. All the plastic was removed. All those ungainly sites were taken off. The railway station, because I wrote a letter to the chairman of the railway board, we got all the overhead wires, all that clutter was removed. So places that were, an eyesore, an embarrassment became absolute, gardens or very, very nice. And they've stayed that way. We've insisted that they be maintained that way. And even today, if you go to the mall of Darjeeling, you won't find that sort of, garbage and refuse all over the place. It's much cleaner, and people are much more conscious of the fact that we have people coming in from different parts of our country, coming from outside. So I think that's where it matters. How do you make a conference and convert it into something that gives you gain on the ground? How does the local person benefit from bringing international conferences? After all, tourism is also MICE. You bring in conferences, you bring in people from across the country and the world. And how does that affect, local people in the region? How does the wealth percolate down? And how does tourism change the lives of people in a manner that we may not even, perceive of or know?
Thanks for sharing, sir. I think truly an incredible thing that happened in G20. I mean, we have seen many events take place in India, but the kind of inclusivity that G20 did by taking different conferences, business meetings all across India to the nook and corner, not only gave exposure to the youth of that part, not only triggered the economy, but actually made them feel as a part of India. That is the story that you know. With if you look at our neighbors and surrounding, they are still struggling with one identity which we have been beautifully able to carve out in spite of so many dialects, so many languages, so many religions. So I think that was a great job. My next question would have been with respect to your tenure as a foreign secretary, but I'm too tempted to prepone a question on Darjeeling because in your answer to the first question, Darjeeling figured many times. I am myself from a place called Nogacha, and Darjeeling is a very close hill station. So it used to be our family vacation place, so a lot of nostalgia. What are we doing, sir? You being from that particular place and working at the back end of the Darjeeling Society, what are you doing actually to improve the livelihood of those in Darjeeling? How do we rekindle the old charm that is associated with Darjeeling? Most of us in our teenage years have imagined all our proposals, love affairs going in that city and in that hill station. I would really like to understand what's the Darjeeling 2.0 going to look like.
Well, Anand, I think in many senses, Darjeeling may be the victim of its own success when it comes to tourism. And I'll try and explain to you. The tea industry is not doing so well. So, a lot of people who were in tea have to find jobs elsewhere. But the tourism industry has come up in a big way because a lot of tourists are coming up, mainly domestic tourists to Darjeeling. But one of the points that I think a conference of this nature has to note is that tourism also has to be sustainable. You have 40,000 cars going up to Darjeeling on a single day. You have traffic jams which are, miles long. And I think the reasons that you go to a hill station may not exist given the sort of, rush and the sort of absolute excessive, let's say, human movement that takes place during certain parts of the summer months. And so I think we have to make it sustainable, not of course by, having any quantitative limit in terms of tourists, but I think you have to make, large swaths of hill stations like this, which are car-free, which are pedestrian-only areas. You have to make sure that, this pressure on land, the desire to acquire, the remaining forested areas, the green covers is resisted. There is also, I think the policy of the West Bengal government is to allocate 25% of all tea gardens, because tea is not doing so well, to tourism. But then that 25% is very essential because that is your green cover. I mean, every tea garden has a certain amount of land under cultivation, but you also have a certain forest cover. So it's very important that you preserve that forest cover because that's what you come to see at the end of the day. Why do you come to a place like Darjeeling? You want a better AQI. You want to be away from cars and traffic. You want to make sure that you see some greenery and some natural scenery. And if you can't have sustainable tourism, it makes it, I would say destinations like this can no longer be pristine. I think you mentioned that also. You visited there, but there is certainly, I would say, a decline. People who've gone to any hill station, you go to Mussoorie, you go to Simla, you go to any hill station in our country, you'll find that it's clogged with tourists and the service is unable to keep up with the demand. So you have to come up with solutions that allow for sustainable tourism. You also have to value add. I think you have volume tourism today. People are just coming because you want to escape the heat. It's 45 degrees in Kolkata, so you want to go up to the hills, you go up to Darjeeling. It's the easiest thing to do. All you need to do is buy a bus ticket, but you don't have hotel reservation. You just turned up there. So it has to be sustainable. You have to add value to it by bringing in things like adventure sports, by bringing in, allow local communities to be benefited by homestays, have community-led initiatives that are important. Vocal for local and Swadeshi is very critical. What are the handicrafts? What are the products that are made locally? Can they be promoted? Can tourists be induced to look at those which are using indigenous materials? My cousin sister runs a very successful retail outlet in Darjeeling. What does she sell? She buys things from bigger cities like Delhi and then sells them in Darjeeling for a huge markup. The same guy going from Delhi is going to buy the stuff at a much higher rate in Darjeeling. So why don't we sell local products? We work with women self-help groups. I mean, by we, I mean Darjeeling Welfare Society, of which I'm the founder president. Works with women self-help groups from tea estates that have actually no longer functional. So these people actually don't have incomes and we are helping them find alternative livelihoods. And when we do that, we look at products that these places are known for, like honey, for example. Honey cultivation is famous in the Makebadi area. Or you have this Dale Khorsani, which is basically this round chili, which is very potent. But when you make it into sort of a paste, then it's a very nice thing. So nicely processed, nicely packaged. It's a great product to give, I mean, for tourists to buy. If you're coming to Darjeeling, you should be buying some of these products that represent the best of that place rather than buying something which you buy here at a much cheaper rate. We had the US ISPF, they had all come down and of course we took them on a train ride, which was a fabulous way to see the place because this is the steam engine that existed more than 100 years ago and many of the steam engines are actually from that era, before 1900, constructed in the late 19th century. So these are experiences that we must give the tourists, but for that we have to obviously bring in value, involve local communities, make sure that there is benefit for everybody, so that all of these places, become more sustainable and also are basically places that can add value to the tourism that you want to bring in.
So thank you for sharing that. I mean, once you talked about that train ride, I think half of us already went into that Mere Sapno Ki Rani. And Makai Bari, I mean, anybody who's a tea fan, if you go to Darjeeling and if you can ever get Makai Bari, I haven't found a better tea than Makai Bari. So yeah, that's great. So, we believe that the role of Indian Foreign Service has changed dramatically. And the expectation from the service is huge, especially as, representatives of US companies sitting out here. We'd really like to understand that as Foreign Secretary, when you held that position, and since you have been an ambassador in this country also, how the Indian Foreign Service is acting as a cultural ambassador to India. What are they doing to promote Indian culture, heritage and tourism in some of the countries where they are stationed?
So, when I was Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister had spoken about this concept called the 3 T's. That is trade, technology and tourism. And we said that every Foreign Service officer should be very well acquainted with what are the 3 T's. What is the value that you're bringing to the table for our country in these 3 areas? What are you doing to promote trade? What are you doing to promote technology? And what are you doing to promote tourism? And with tourism, I'll also attach culture. You mentioned culture. It's also linked to that. And we also made it a point to include it in the annual performance review. In other words, your confidential report at the end of the year would also have a column which basically indicated how successful you were in these 3 endeavors. So I might, be an officer doing political work because many Foreign Service officers are inclined and predisposed towards political reporting. But I think in today's context, being a commercial officer, a trade representative, being someone who's dealing with promoting tourism and culture is equally important, if not more important. And so what do you do to promote culture? What do you do to promote tourism, for example? We have cultural centers in most countries. For some reason, we didn't have it in the US. But essentially, a cultural center is an outpost of your tourism soft power, so to speak. You have yoga, you have performances, you encourage, young people from that area to, look at what Indian culture is all about. And the more people you can get involved, the better it is. But with culture also comes an interest in India. Culture is a very wide area. I mean, it's not just music, song and dance. It's also cuisine. It's also lifestyle. It's also fashion. How do you get people interested in India? What is the soft sell that you can do for India? It's not only a question of Incredible India advertisements. That's important. But what can a cultural outpost do to get, kindle the interest of people in your area to visit India? My colleague Ashok was in Argentina and he worked on promoting tourism from Argentina and Colombia into India. And one of the ways I think he was telling me that they did it was to have various shows that promoted Indian products. You know, I'm talking about not products that are finished products, but basically handicrafts, basically, textiles. So people had an interest in India. People had an interest in the spirituality in India. You know, people in places like Colombia came to India and spent months here, searching in the salvation of spirituality and the sort of things that we can offer with Ayurveda and with yoga and everything else. So promoting culture, promoting tourism is part of any Indian diplomat's mandate. And I think any ambassador who does not do this is not doing his job fully. How do you ensure that your country is one that is on the radar screen of a lot of people? I mean, there are many ways that you can do that. When I was in Thailand, we organized a Northeast a fashion show in which we had some of the top designers from the Northeast come down. We had the then, Chief Minister's representative come down from Assam. We had many of the Northeastern states represented. I mean, all that color and all that pageantry actually resulted in a lot of interest in Northeast India because, of course, we had also direct flights from Bangkok to Guwahati and to Bagdogra, which is Darjeeling in my area. So that also helped that, people could take the flight and come in directly. And I think that promoted tourism from Southeast Asia as well. So essentially, you have to look at it as a package, look at it as promoting India through your soft power diplomacy. And I think that is the most, I would say, successful part of India's outreach till today. We are not a country that believes in hard diplomacy. We are not a country that believes in military solutions. Obviously, if aggressed, we will respond equally. But we are a country that has, as Prime Minister says, gifted yoga to the world. Yoga has been there for centuries, it's not millennia. And today, yoga has been rediscovered all because the Prime Minister went to the UN and he said that, look, I give you a proposition, make yoga, create an international day for yoga. 21st June, summer solstice is the right day. Try and look at it as a day in which everybody looks at yoga. And within 70 days of that, I'm told 77 days, the UN adopted a resolution which is the highest ever co-sponsorships in the UN in its history, declaring 21st June as the International Day of Yoga. And we haven't looked back since. Yoga is today practiced in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Bangladesh. When I was the High Commissioner there, the Hifazat-e-Islam had issued a fatwa against yoga, saying that it is anti-Islamic. People should not go and attend the yoga day event that we were doing at the stadium. And after the fatwa was issued, 12,000 people turned up at our event. We had to close the gates of the stadium. People couldn't fit inside. So what I'm trying to say is that the appeal of our soft power goes beyond anything that radicalism, fundamentalism can use. This is a potent counter to many of the problems of the world that the world is facing today. India has a solution to the problems. Our ancient philosophy, ancient medicines, ancient, I would say, preventive medication like yoga is something that the world needs today. The world is looking for these panaceas to the global issues that we keep talking about, conflicts, wars, etc. A lot of this can be prevented if you can look, basically talk to people on the lines of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Let's help each other rather than fight with each other. Anyway.
So thank you for sharing that insight. Those of us who have been in the government and I have been, such systemic things that you bring a part of your performance appraisal that you have to promote Indian tourism and culture has a deep impact. In the corporate world, we call OKRs, objectives and key results. So imagine if something becomes a part of our OKR, we have no option but to perform. Not that we would like to, but thank you for doing that. And, every time you share a thought, one gets into so much of different type of nostalgia. I started my career from Northeast. For those of you who haven't been there, as a probationer, we trained at the IS Academy, where you see the Northern Himalayas. But believe me, the Eastern Himalayas are much more beautiful than northern Himalayas because the slopes are gradual and the bamboo forests make it look very beautiful. And on yoga, India is a country with such contrast. My yoga teacher is a Muslim girl. So, I can understand that. Thank God that UN adopted Yoga Day, and now that acceptability does come from international recognition, and kudos to our Prime Minister for doing it. So, we are at a very interesting cusp of our history. Like, we want to be not just the third largest economy. Given a choice, we'd like to become the largest economy. And tourism plays a big role. We would like to understand from you, what would you say that there are three, reforms, whether it is on infrastructure or policy, that can actually act as a multiplier effect on tourism sector as it stands today? I mean, from whatever we are getting it, like 2 to 3% of the GDP, can we take it to 10% of the GDP? And what could be those 3, 4 concrete steps?
Well, to attain our goal of a Viksit Bharat by 2047, our rate of growth has to be close to 10%. And it means that all aspects of our economy have to be growing very fast. And tourism is very important. I mean, we cannot, overstate the importance of tourism in that regard, because tourism is, it stimulates the economy and it benefits, it percolates down to the lowest possible level. Just to give you an example, I run a hotel in my hometown in Darjeeling. I run it because it's a heritage home. It's 150 years old. I don't need to run it as a hotel, but the only reason I do it is that it employs directly about 12 people, but indirectly maybe 100 people get some benefit from that hotel. It's also a heritage building, so whatever profits are generated go into maintaining that building. And once I was trying to renovate it, and I called a few contractors, and they said, "Look, the best thing you can do is to completely destroy this building and build a high rise." So I said, no, that wasn't my intention. So the reason I put it out of the hotel is only so that I can maintain its heritage character, and it is there preserved for posterity. Now, but the point I'm trying to make is that, you have places like this that can give a lot of people employment. It brings a lot of value. Recently, of course, you saw that the finance minister announced in the budget, there's a fast train, high-speed train to Varanasi and a high-speed train to Siliguri. Now, I think one advantage of these high-speed trains is it can bring tourists much, at much more convenient way into places that they want to visit across our country. And I think if you look at the fact that, Varanasi is a point which is very important in the Buddhist circuit, because one of the three things that you asked me is, we must develop a very effective Buddhist circuit. Now, there are 4 points in India which are very important for Buddhist tourists coming from across the world, especially East and Southeast Asia, but also Sri Lanka and many places, is that you need to develop Varanasi, you need to develop Bodh Gaya, you need to develop Rajgir and Kushinagar. All points related to Buddha's, life and life's journey, his speech, his first sermon, where he died and so on and so forth. And if you can have a high-speed train that goes across these 4 places, and you've already reached Varanasi, so why not have a high-speed train that connects these 4 places? Have 5-star hotels and a certain comfortable level of hotels and conveniences there. We still don't have it. We were trying to host a G20 event in Bodh Gaya, and we found that there was no hotel that we could put up our guests. And Bodh Gaya is such an important part of the Buddhist circuit. I mean, if you do it properly, you do it well, and you do it right, you can get hundreds of thousands of high-paying tourists who want to come in, who can fly in directly to Bodh Gaya or take that high-speed train circuit and go around. So my first point is focus on the Buddhist circuit, provide conveniences and amenities that foreign tourists require. If you've seen, the number of foreign tourists last year increased by 4%, which means there were 65 million more foreign tourists traveling last year than the year before. So we've almost reached pre-pandemic levels in foreign tourist travels. Domestic tourism has gone up by 25%. Domestic tourism is great, but foreign tourists give you double or triple the revenue of domestic tourists. You need foreign tourists for 2 reasons. You need their foreign exchange. You need also that extra value addition that is there. And of course, you need also your soft power to say that I'm a great tourism destination. But how do you make it convenient for foreign tourists and your higher paying tourists to go to these places? So one is the Buddhist circuit. The second is that we are a great country for people to come down for medical treatment. People want to come to India for medical treatment from the Gulf, from Southeast Asia, from Central Asia, from across the region, from Africa as well. Huge amount of medical tourism. But we don't have appropriate facilities. I was very happy to see the finance minister announced 4 medical hubs, regional medical hubs, right? I mean, if you get the hubs properly, you create the hubs properly, you create not only these medical facilities, but you create hotels for those who accompany. If my father is going to be admitted in hospital in India, I would come with him, someone else would come with him, but you would stay in a hotel, you have to have a good hotel close by. So with that medical hub should be a tourism hub also, develop that properly, plan it in advance, have a smart city concept where everything is already done in advance. You don't have this haphazard growth that you have everywhere. You can have a planned development that here's the hospital, here's the green area, here's the hotel, it's walking distance. So why not have these regional hubs linked to tourism? So that's my second point. And the third, as I said, is sustainable tourism. We plan what is sustainable. We involve local communities, and that point I've already made before. So these are my three takeaways for what you asked. What can we do to promote tourism in our country? What can we do to get higher value for our tourism? Greater, I would say value for our, let's say, tourism facilities, and try and ensure that the revenue that you get from that tourism industry is much more significant than what we do now.
Thank you, sir. I mean, I'm again reflecting back to what you were saying. It's a great thought. You have been an ambassador to Bangladesh. We have the number of medical tourists we are having from Bangladesh coming to India is simply phenomenal. I mean, somewhere the figure is at 500 crores of revenue we make from that. But one challenge I found, and that's because you shared that idea, is that often in Bangladesh, people would confide to me that there's no direct flight between Dhaka and Hyderabad. While there's a direct flight between Dhaka and Bangalore and Dhaka and Chennai, Hyderabad is much more religiously aligned to Bangladeshis. So we have to sometimes be very aware of the softer power of some of these things. And you're right, if we can get, a package comprehensive offering, then no South Asian travels alone to get treatment done. The entire family comes with them. Moving on to the next topic, sir, what are some of the key public-private partnerships which you think can actually fuel the next growth? Because we have tried PPP in many areas, but there are areas where we really, like you talked about, establishment of hotels at the right locations. Can you throw some light on how PPP can play a role actually specific to tourism sector?
Well, the only way tourism can really grow is through public-private partnerships. Government has to provide the facilitation and the rest has to be left to the private sector. I mentioned the smart city concept. What is the smart city concept? Smart city concept is the government develops, a plan for a city, and you lay the basic essentials of a city, and underground sewerage, power lines, fiber optic lines, everything is put in advance. You have a layout in terms of roads, the entire place is planned. And then you say, and give it to the private sector. Here's how it should be done. I don't want to take names, but there are cases where cities are developed without that sort of planning, and it is developed in a haphazard manner. And today you have all the problems. You might have a 20 crore flat, but if your, entire place below is flooded, what's the use of your investment? So the point is that, you have to have cities that are much better planned. Noida, for example, is a well-planned city. They have taken care to put in the essentials before they've brought in, private sector development. So government, if it has to develop tourism centers, I spoke about Bodh Gaya, for example. Now, Bodh Gaya or Kushinagar is, we've got an airport there. We want to make it an international airport. But where do you stay in Kushinagar? You might land in Kushinagar, but you have to have a place to stay. So why not develop a sort of a tourism city there, which has, place for 5-star hotels? So government has to provide the basic framework. Government has to provide the legislative basic, let's say, background to this. Government has to provide, a sort of, plan that would assure investors like yourself that, putting my money in here is a safe bet, a good bet. And then, of course, leave it to the private sector to do what it does best, is essentially, construct hotels, make sure that there is a viability. A good example is the Sabarmati River development. If you see the high-speed, bullet train will end at where the Sabarmati River development is. So the railway station will be there. Next to the railway station, we're developing these 5- and 7-star hubs. And then there are crowded residential localities. And then there is the Sabarmati Ashram. And that entire place, if it is seen as one entity, you develop that entire area as one sort of a semi-tourism come business entity. So it becomes a hub. It becomes an integrated plan. And I was been discussing this with some of my colleagues, including the MP from Ahmedabad. I said, why not take this up as an integrated development, develop the entire area, so that, if you're in business and you come in by the high-speed train and you've finished your business in Ahmedabad, you can go across to the Sabarmati Ashram, you can go across to the other places of tourism interest, the riverfront. The river itself is fabulous. So develop it as a place where you have multimodal facilities. You can take from the train, you can take a bus, you can take a monorail, you can take a river. There's a river passage also which is there. So all sorts of options are there, provided you can conceive it on a holistic basis and then implement it in a manner that can be investor friendly, so to speak.
We are coming to the close, and I would like to really pose some questions of the interest to the gentry here, which is the US travelers. So last year we had 1.8 million travelers coming from US to India. Now, these are people with fat wallets. What can we do to take it to 3x? That's one question in my mind. And secondly, how can US companies closely associate with the communities here, especially through their CSR programs?
I think one of the areas where we made progress, but I think there's scope for more, is connectivity. Direct flights between the US and India. I think there should be much more competition in that sector. I still don't think there's enough competition in terms of direct flights. There are limitations, and there's a lot of price gouging that takes place. If you can have airline fares that are reasonable, that allow you smooth connectivity, I think the tourist inflows from the United States will be significantly increased. And the more flights you have, let's face it, the more rational the rate is going to be. And of course, as I said, I think, you have to have a plan to be able to bring tourists down. You have to be able to, appeal to certain areas and parts of your country that deserve tourism. Let me tell you that in India, even today, tourism is confined to certain parts of our country. You have the Golden Triangle. You've got some western, southern states where tourism is concentrated. But you've got entire areas like the Northeast where tourism is hardly a factor. The other day I went to Mizoram, and as I was landing, I saw this entire railway line that has reached Aizol practically. Now I counted from the air that there were at least 7 tunnels that were constructed to get this train just in the area near Aizol. So you can imagine the sort of tunneling that is involved, the sort of effort that has gone in to get the railway right up to that place. So the railway comes there, but where do you go and stay? What do you go and do? How do you develop tourism there? What is the way to ensure that your protected area permit or restricted area permit is a smooth exercise? Because even we as Indian citizens have to take some permit or the other to go to Nagaland and to Mizoram. So it has to be a smooth process. This, whether it's security, it is tourism, it is transport, has to be all integrated. There has to be a holistic. It can't be dealt with in silos. So if you have a holistic approach, you can handle it. And I think areas like the Northeast are really, sitting there as potential tourism, development points in our country that can offer the next big jump in tourism. And I see that a lot of hotels are taking interest. I mean, hotel chains are investing. There are 4-star hotels, there are 5-star hotels coming up. So a lot of infrastructure is coming up in the Northeast, but I think it has to be integrated. It can't be haphazard. What you see now is, some initiative, someone is putting up a hotel, someone is doing this. But these states and the central government have to coordinate tourism in a way that is effective, that can channelize tourism in a way that is most, I would say, desirable from the point of view of both the tourist and the tourism industry. And if you can get this right, then you can open up vast swaths of areas like the Northeast in our country and make it accessible to tourists like those from the United States. I mean, the US is one of the countries which provides for a maximum number of tourists. But I mean, today, mind you, tourism from China is also huge. And if you see the statistics, maybe the maximum number of tourists are going out from China. So, I mean, the point is that where are you going to tap these tourists? What are the facilities you'll offer them here? What are those areas in India that you can offer them through a digital platform, like an, like a package tour that says that, look, do all of this and, this is going to be a great experience. So I think we have to really look at it in a holistic way. And I have no doubt that our Ministry of Tourism people and those who are working on it are doing it, and it's easy to have ideas and to give suggestions, and it's another thing to implement, but I'm just telling you from based on my experience in government, where I've been trying to work on issues like, the Buddhism circuit, issues on opening up the Northeast, trying to work with our different, ministries and agencies in that endeavor. And the exercise is an ongoing one. It's not the easiest one. But I think we need to, as I said, we need to work on it and we need to get it right.
So very like right on bang on target, sir. I'm not getting a business class ticket to SFO because there is no direct connectivity. And I started my career in Northeast in the railways, and we were making that line in 2000. The line got completed in 2020, so it has taken us 20 years to reach Aizawl. So you're absolutely right. Last thoughts on what can we do in CSR to actually make relevant contribution to tourism in India?
Well, I think, as I said, sustainable tourism is something that CSR funding can look at. Creating community-led tourism and involving communities in tourism. You have game sanctuaries that offer huge scope. Many countries have realized that it is much better to be involved in the protection and preservation of your natural heritage than to destroy it for timber or other, short-term gains. This is a long-term heritage in our country. You have to protect your forests, you have to protect your green areas, and protect that part of our country which is still left in terms of, our natural heritage. And to do that, of course, you have to, as I said, you can open everything up to tourism, but look at the impact of tourism even in some of our, most spiritual places. Because there are so many tourists, the footfall is so great that you have problems where, places are actually sinking because of the fact that these are fragile ecosystems and they can't handle that sort of pressure. So you have to create, CSR funding and create the right conditions. You have to create the right environment for tourists to go in. And one of the things I think we should really work on is a Swachh Bharat Abhiyan in the tourist areas. What is the Swachhata campaign if we can, if we litter every place we go full of plastics? You have to be able to educate our public. You have to be able to create. In Darjeeling, they said, what is the problem is that this, everyone throws stuff around the mall, and then the sweepers come and sweep it down the hillside. Off the road into the hillside, but the plastics are all along the hillside. So I said, why don't you put up large waste bins? At least in tourism, throw it into the waste bin. They won't throw it on the road. But they said, no, the waste bins are then stolen. I said, no, then you make sure that they are screwed on or whatever it is. But you need solutions that you can give tourists, and there are many places that I see that some places, even progressive places, like there are very few places that have special bins for plastics. Keep that sort of thing, keep your environment clean. That's one of the things we need desperately. I go to places, 10 years later I find that that place doesn't exist. A place that I remember leopards prowling today is a bus depot which is full of fumes and full of. Now, there's nothing wrong because you have to have roads, you have to have development, but make it sustainable, make it possible for future generations to have something left of what we see today. And of course, I think make it clean and make it an environment that we can be proud of and people who come to visit us can be proud of. You have to start with the communities. That is where CSR really helps. And I'm happy to work with any of you when it comes to my part of the country. I think we're doing a lot to make sustainable tourism in Darjeeling something that is a reality. And by Darjeeling, I mean the whole of North Bengal and the Northeast. And I think there is a lot of scope to work with communities to preserve our heritage and make it accessible for tourists in a most eco-friendly manner that we would like. Thank you.
Ambassador Singla, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Singla.